And so coming to terms with the fact that there is no entity, there is no one home, there is only absence, as Jose Maria said, el vacío. It's true, there is el vacío. But what is the vacío? It's not even a lack of being, because even that would be something. It's not even that. It's not even a non-being. It's not anything that can be described, and there's no one to describe it. So in that sense, it's perfect freedom. But it's a freedom that cannot be used by anyone for any purpose. And the kicker in all of this, and the reason why it's so important, is that we spend so much of our time trying to figure out what we're going to do next in our lives, right? And there is nobody doing anything. And all of that is an illusion, because you don't decide anything. It's decided for you. What all the mind does is rationalize something that has happened. But it's paralyzed in terms of making a decision. Should I? Should I? She loves me not, right? All of that. Something happens, and then, okay, I did that because, when you make up some discourse about why you did it. But that's not why it happened. Why whatever happens in this hallucination happens is completely unknowable. And that's why, Ramana told his mother when he wouldn't go back home with her that, hey, the ordainer decides. I don't decide this. And he was being truthful there. It's not that he was deciding not to go. He wasn't deciding anything because he was already realized that he didn't exist. So if the decision were to be made to go home, it would have been made. We really don't decide anything, and we don't do anything. And so if we would stop believing that we have to make all of these important decisions that will determine our destiny and all of that, we'd save 90% of our energy, which goes into worrying about all these things. So there's no one who exists who makes any decisions, who does anything, who achieves anything, who ultimately kills their ego. All of that is a myth. It's probably a real downer for you all. But let's explore then what's underneath that myth. If that is all untrue, what is the real? What is the consciousness that is apparently watching this movie, but isn't really watching the movie because there's no one there? It's an emptiness, it's a nothingness. So there's no one watching the movie, right? We've established that. Because if there were someone watching the movie, that one would be an object. It would be an entity, a thing. And we've already established there can't be an entity or a thing. Because whatever is an object is being perceived by consciousness. And so consciousness inherently is non-objective and therefore non-existent. So the self cannot be an object, but nor can it be a subject. Because as soon as it is identified as a subject, it becomes a subjective object. Right? This is the problem. As soon as you have the I thought, you have created the illusion again. There is no I. The concept of I is the first mistake, and then everything else follows upon that. So there is no I. So therefore, what is watching the movie is the movie itself. This is a self-enjoying video game. A self-licking ice cream cone. But the self cannot be an individual observer. So even this idea of being the witness is still within the mythology, because there is no one witnessing. The witness is the entire hologram itself, not some individual part of it, because it's not made up of individual parts or entity. It's one whole. Therefore, consciousness is not localizable, whether in any particular organism or point in space or time. And that's why it's possible to have spontaneous memories of past lives or future lives, or being out of body, or being in someone else's body, or someone else possessing your body, or any of that. Why? Because it's only an illusion. It's only a mental construct that can float around in that illusion, because that's all the illusion is anyway, is made up of these constructs. But the constructs have no reality, they have no life, except to the extent that they are believed in. And this is why there can be ghosts, okay? Even though you don't exist, if you believe you exist, then that energy of belief gives life even to a subtle form after the physical body has died. And if the belief is strong enough, then that illusion of a person can haunt its home, its friends, its spouse, its whoever it wants to. Or if it gave its heart in a transplant to someone, it can follow into the body of that person who now has its heart in their body. But what is it that is doing that is only an illusion, a consciousness bonded to the illusion of a construct of a me. And so you can have all of these extraordinary phenomena happening, and yet none of them are real. And therefore there's nothing that you need to do about them. And so shamans can easily heal these things by recognizing that it's illusion, and with a stronger laser beam of mental energy cut through that belief in the person who is being disturbed, let's say, by a ghost, or a curse put on by some black magician or whatever. These things can happen, but they all happen within the video game. But they have nothing to do with who you really are. Because you do not exist except as the entirety of the intelligence that makes up the phenomenal universe itself. Now, if you use that information to hollow out the ego mind and allow it to enable you to drop the game of belief that there is an ego that now has to wonder, how do I relate to my friends, and what should I do with my life, and all that. All of that is ridiculous from that standpoint, right? But it'll happen, it will unfold, the video game will continue to play. But none of it really is of very much interest anymore, once you get this. And you won't be obsessed with trying to figure out your life. You won't be obsessed with your body and trying to make it look as good as possible and stay young for as long as possible, and all of those things that people waste their existence on, instead of getting to the heart of the true ontological essence of what is. So you have to have the courage to wipe away all the mythologies and to stop believing in your own ego and stop trying to kill it off since it doesn't exist in the first place. There is nothing to do, and there is no one to do it. So once you get rid of that, life becomes very simple. And the mind becomes very silent. But there's a mourning period that goes with this realization. There's a grieving of the loss of the illusion, the grand illusion of the hero's journey, or of whatever mythological ideal that you bonded to in your life. And most people are unable to go through the mourning of the loss of all of the ego illusions. It's too hard to live without illusions. So people want mythologies. They want to believe in Christ crucified and risen, right? They spend the whole week, this week, getting drunk and pretending they're praying. But they need to be able to tell their children some mythology, so they can justify why they're spanking them for not being good and all of that. But the whole world depends on these mythologies, whether religious or secular. And yet if we don't have some beings who have awakened and have gone through the disillusionment of the loss of ego identity, then there's no way out of the suffering for all of those within the video game who, although they don't exist, they do suffer. And the good thing about non-existence is then there's no one to suffer either. There's no enjoyments, but there's no suffering. And so the bliss that we talk about is not a blissful achievement of an entity, of a being, but it's the complete absence of any suffering or stress. That's why I called it a deep peace. And imagine letting go of everything. It is a death. It is the real death. It's the death of worry. It's the death of stressing out over what's going to happen. And did I just make a mistake? Should I have told them all of this? Uh-oh. Oops. Right? All of those things. Well, I don't worry about it because there's no one to worry. It's too late. It happened. It wasn't my fault. The video game did it. I didn't do it. So you're free of all that worry, all that performance anxiety that is 90% of the anxiety that people feel. The other 10 is what other people are going to do to you, their performances. But these kinds of issues, when they are all released, they do create bliss. But there's no one experiencing that bliss. It's not an attribute of some being. It's simply the lack of a being to suffer. But there is no being to be in bliss. But bliss is the nature of all that is. But it's not something that is achieved by an individual through killing off an illusion of an ego. There is no individual. Although, if you analyze the etymology of the word individual, it means undividable. And in that sense, because you don't exist, you're not dividable. So it's correct, but it's not an undividable atom or entity of some kind. It's that you are nothing, so how can it be cut into pieces? So give yourself permission to grok the fact that you don't exist and therefore will never achieve anything in life. And will never achieve salvation because there's nobody to save. But that you're already beyond the need for salvation, since you are not. And even though, as I say, you can say that the phenomenal plane is the manifestation of that emptiness. But even the phenomenal plane is a hallucination. So it can't save you and say, okay, I exist as the world, since the world also is just an appearance with no essence, no substance. And it's a constant flux. There's nothing permanent in it. And eventually, the Big Bang will turn into a big crunch, and there'll be nothing left of the universe anyway. So it's only a temporary measure at best. And so if we're going to be mature adults here, we have to accept the fact of the nothingness. And let go of all the mythologies that we have held on to, the discourse, the narratives about who we are, and why we hate who we are, and why we wish we had a different life, with different friends and different qualities, and more money, well, all of these things that fill the minds. Garbage in, garbage out, right? What would it be like? Do a thought experiment with me now. What would it be like to let go of all of those narratives? All of them. Once and for all. And to be the mind in absolute emptiness. With no desire, not even the highest desire of liberation. No fear. What can happen to you? You're already gone. Never were. And be absolutely free of any emotion, any thought. Not identify with any sensation, not desire to have any sensual pleasure. That's all the mirage. Not desire anything at all. Not fear anything. How would that feel? Close your eyes for a moment and just let yourself have that knowledge of being the emptiness, the authentic, real emptiness. Allow the emptiness to be absolutely empty of thought. This is not something to think about. There is no thinker. Make sure you let go of the fears of that illusion, illusory ego, the neuroses, the obsessions, the addictions, the anxieties, the superego attacks. Let go of all of that because it's all mythology that's just there to support the illusion that you exist. Drop it all. And see if it feels okay to realize in the long term, permanently, once and for all, that you don't exist. And not to forget this, not to go back into some mythology of existence. Would it be okay to live in this state? Or would it be unbearable? Is it liberation, or is it the worst loss conceivable? Or both? Can you? And here's the kicker. Since you don't exist, you can't even choose whether you're going to do it or not. There's no one there who can make that choice. Doesn't God have a great sense of humor? It's a crapshoot. But by enjoying that same sense of humor, that's the portal out of the delusion of egoic existence. If you can laugh at your own absurdity, the ridiculousness of believing in your own existence, and how important your existence is. Ha ha ha. How self-important the ego is, huh? If you can let go of that and laugh, then at least you exist as the laugh. Or do you? Does even that belong to an individual? Not even that. You don't control whether you're going to open your eyes again, but if they happen to open, that's okay. And if it so happens that a question wants to be asked coming out of your mouth, you'll raise your hand and it'll be asked. But don't create the illusion that you're asking a question. But if one spontaneously wants to emerge, that's okay. But give yourself permission to remain in the realization that you are being lived. You are not living. Your life is being lived. And you have no volitional control over how it's being lived. Who's living your life? But as long as there's an unconscious, the life is lived by the drives of that horrible soy burger you just had to learn about. But once that realization of its non-existence happens, then at least that is not living your life any longer. And then what will live your life is the completely unpredictable spontaneity of this non-existent, hyper-real emptiness.